The bottle was small, clinical, and cold in my palm. The kind of cold that seeps into your skin and stays there like a quiet accusation. I turned it over once. Twice. The label read Nullcent Pro, Advanced Designation, Masking Formula, 72-hour coverage. The pharmacist had slid it across the counter without blinking, because this was perfectly legal, perfectly ordinary, and used by half the professional world. Omegas who wanted to be taken seriously in fields where their designation could work against them. Alphas who didn't want to flood boardrooms with their natural dominance scent and make everyone uncomfortable. Betas who wanted to smell like nothing at all for no particular reason except privacy. I had purchased it for a reason that sat somewhere between desperation and survival. The job listing had been clear, in the way that things are sometimes clear without ever saying the ugly part out loud. C Coordinator of Operations, Hopper and Associates, fast-paced environment, high pressure, detail-oriented candidates preferred. Must thrive under assertive leadership. There had been something in the phrasing, assertive leadership, which was a particular kind of corporate code, that made my stomach tighten. And then I'd done my research, because I always do my research, which is, ironically, the very quality that makes me excellent at the kind of job I was applying for. Carrie Roach. The name alone had returned 17 pages of search results. Youngest managing director in the firm's history. Built the operations division from a department of 4 into a team of 32 in under 8 years. Known for being exacting, demanding, and, according to 3 separate anonymous reviews on a professional forum, assess an alpha who actually uses it. That last phrase had given me pause. In most workplaces, designation didn't come up much. The suppressant industry had leveled the playing field considerably over the past 2 decades. People were people. Colleagues were colleagues. The old hierarchical instincts were, theoretically, a matter of biology that modern society had agreed to collectively set aside. Theoretically. But there were still workplaces, and still bosses, where it mattered. Where an alpha in a leadership position expected a certain deference from omegas on the team, not because they demanded it consciously, but because the ancient wiring of scent and instinct kicked in and nobody knew how to turn it off gracefully. Where an omega applicant might be quietly passed over for someone who wouldn't create complicated dynamics. Where I might not even make it to the second interview. I had applied anyway, because the salary was 40% above my current position, and because my current position was slowly grinding me into powder. And when I'd been invited to interview, I had made a decision. I shook 3 drops of Nullcent Pro onto my wrist, the way the instructions said. The scent dissolved immediately, replaced by the faint medicinal nothing that the formula left behind. A blank space where a person's chemistry used to be. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles I'd tried to address with concealer. A blazer that was slightly too formal for the office aesthetic I'd researched, but that gave me, I hoped, an air of solidity. Hair pulled back in the way that meant business. I looked, I decided, like a beta. A competent, unremarkable, perfectly ordinary beta. The mirror did not agree or disagree. I grabbed my bag and went to lie my way into the best job I'd ever been offered. The offices of Hopper and Associates occupied 2 floors of a building downtown, and the lobby smelled like expensive coffee and something floral that was piped through the ventilation on purpose. I noticed these things because I notice everything. It is both my best quality and the one that has historically made me the worst person to watch films with. The receptionist was a beta named Marcus, according to his lanyard, and he smiled at me with the practiced warmth of someone who had greeted hundreds of nervous applicants. He took my name, offered me water, and directed me to a seating area with low, uncomfortable chairs that I suspected were chosen specifically to prevent candidates from relaxing too much. I sat. I breathed. I checked my phone. I breathed again. There were 2 other people waiting. One was reviewing notes on a tablet with the focused intensity of someone cramming before an exam. The other was doing the specific kind of nothing that people do when they're pretending not to be nervous. Staring at a middle distance, hands very still, jaw slightly tight. I recognized both expressions from the inside. At 12 minutes past my appointment time, which I had noted because I note things, the inner door opened and a woman I recognized from LinkedIn photos as Danielle, the HR coordinator, appeared with a clipboard and a smile. Nate Hopper? My name, in someone else's mouth, always takes me a half second to claim. I've been told this is a beta thing. I've also been told it's an anxiety thing. Possibly both. That's me. I stood, gathered my folder, followed her through the door. The interview with Danielle and 2 other team leads went well. I knew it went well because I am in fact excellent at what I do, and the questions they asked were ones I had answers for. Detailed, confident, substantiated. By examples, answers that I'd rehearsed enough times that they sounded, I hoped, natural. They laughed at something I said. They exchanged looks that were the good kind. Danielle made a note. "You'll have a brief meeting with Carrie Roach before we wrap up," Danielle said at the end, gathering her papers. "Just a formality. Carrie likes to meet all the final candidates." Of course, I said. It was not, I suspected, going to be a formality. Carrie Roach's office was at the end of a hallway that felt, with every step, slightly longer than it had looked from the other end. The door was open. I stepped through it, and in the first second, I registered. A desk that was clear except for one open file and a cup of black coffee. Bookshelves that were actually organized and actually used. A window that let in afternoon light at an angle that made the whole room feel slightly warmer than the rest of the building. In the second, I registered the person behind the desk. Carrie Roach was. This is the part I had not been adequately prepared for, despite 17 pages of search results and 3 professional forum reviews. Unreasonably arresting. That is not how I would normally describe a person, but it is the most honest word I can reach for. Dark hair, cut short on the sides and slightly longer on top, in a way that was neat without being rigid. Sharp features. Eyes, the color of something between green and gray that I could not, in the moment, categorize. An alpha, obviously, even before the scent registered, faintly, through my suppressant's interference, like a signal heard through static, the presence was unmistakable. The particular quality of stillness that some alphas have, not like waiting, but like choosing. Carrie looked up from the file. And in under 10 seconds, I would replay this moment many times in the weeks that followed, counting carefully. Carrie's eyes moved from my face to my wrist to something that wasn't my wrist, but was near it. And something in that expression shifted. Not much, just enough. Just enough for me to know that I had been completely, immediately, and thoroughly seen. "Nate Hopper," Carrie said. Not a question. Yes. I sat in the offered chair and felt, for the first time all day, exactly as exposed as I was. "Tell me about your experience managing multi-team coordination under deadline pressure." And that was it. Nothing else. No acknowledgement of the thing that had just passed between us. Carrie opened a pen, turned a page in the file, and asked me a perfectly professional question in a perfectly neutral voice. I answered it. We continued. The interview lasted 17 minutes. Carrie asked good questions. The kind that were harder to prepare for because they were actually probing for something, not just performing the ritual of assessment. At the end, Carrie closed the file and said, "We'll be in touch within the week." I thanked Carrie, stood, walked to the door. "Mr. Hopper." I turned. Carrie was already looking back at the file. "The suppressant you're using," Carrie said, "is excellent. You'd never know, in a busy room. Quieter environments are harder." I stood in the doorway and felt my heart do something embarrassing. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. "Good." A pause. "The job is yours if you want it." I did not say, "How?" I did not say, "Why?" I did not say any of the 17 things that were pressing against the back of my teeth. "Thank you," I said instead. I walked back down the hallway and did not look at my wrist until I was in the elevator, and even then, it just looked like a wrist, which was perhaps the point. I took the job. This is probably not surprising to anyone, given the salary and the circumstances, and the fact that the alternative was continuing to watch my current role erode my enthusiasm for the field I'd spent 6 years building a career in. But I want to be transparent about the fact that I had a full 48 hours of genuine deliberation before I called Danielle to accept. The deliberation was not about Carrie. I told myself the deliberation was not about Carrie. My first day began with the standard onboarding, badge desk introductions, the tour that every workplace gives where you try to memorize where the bathrooms and the printer and the coffee machine are, and invariably remember only one of those three locations. My desk was in the open plan section of the second floor, between a woman named Priya, who managed vendor relationships, and a man named Callum, who did something with data that I didn't fully understand yet, but that he was clearly very proud of. The cardinal rule, Priya said, handing me a mug of coffee without being asked, which immediately made me like her, is don't eat anything smelly at your desk. The ventilation on this floor is basically decorative. Noted. Also, Carrie's door is open unless it's closed. Closed means genuinely do not knock unless the building is on fire. Open means you can knock, and Carrie will actually answer. What if it's a really important non-fire situation and the door is closed? Priya looked at me with the measured patience of someone who has had this exact conversation before. Then you email, and you phrase the subject line so Carrie knows it's actually important and not just someone asking about the quarterly review format again. Who keeps asking about the quarterly review format? Priya's expression said this was a long story and also possibly classified information. Callum rolled his chair over from the other side. He was the sort of person who moved through the world with a low-grade enthusiasm that was genuinely charming rather than exhausting. The team's good, he said. You'll like it here. Carrie is... He paused, searching for the word with the care of someone who'd chosen incorrectly before. Demanding, but fair, and brilliant actually. The kind of brilliant that's useful, not the kind that just makes everyone feel bad. Ibar, I observed. You'd be surprised how rarely it's cleared. He offered his hand. Welcome to the madness. I shook it and felt, for the first time since accepting the offer, a genuine flicker of something that might have been optimism. I did not see Carrie until the afternoon, and then only briefly, when Carrie walked through the open plan floor with a tablet and a focused expression that made the ambient noise level drop by approximately 15% without anyone appearing to consciously cause it. It was the kind of effect that some alphas have, a natural atmospheric shift, and Carrie either hadn't noticed or had decided long ago not to manage it. Carrie stopped at my desk. I looked up. How's orientation? Productive, I said. Priya explained the cardinal rule about smells. Callum is teaching me the data visualization system. Good. Carrie glanced at Callum with an expression that was, I thought, fond, without announcing itself as such. Don't let him over-engineer the dashboard again. I hear that, Callum said, with the ease of someone who has heard it many times and considers it a term of endearment. Carrie looked back at me. Something in those gray-green eyes that I still couldn't categorize moved and then settled. My office at 4. I'll walk you through the current project priorities before the week's end. 4, I confirmed. Carrie walked on. The ambient noise returned to its normal level. Priya, without looking up from her screen, handed me a second mug of coffee that she'd apparently prepared at some point during the exchange. You'll get used to that, she said. I wasn't sure what she meant exactly, and I didn't ask. The 4 o'clock meeting lasted an hour and 20 minutes, which I did not think was unusual until Callum mentioned the next morning. That Carrie's meetings almost never ran longer than 30 minutes, unless they involved contract negotiations or a serious operational crisis. I filed this information away and did not take it out and look at it for the rest of the day. What I did do during those 80 minutes was learn more about the actual scope of the role than any interview had suggested. Carrie talked about the projects with the kind of detail that assumed intelligence and the kind of pace that assumed engagement, and I found myself, contrary to every professional protection instinct I had, genuinely interested. Not just performing interest, the way you do in early days when you're still building credibility. Actually interested. The kind of interested that makes you ask follow-up questions that go slightly beyond the scope of what you were told. Carrie answered every one of them. At the end, when I was gathering my notes to leave, Carrie said, without particular emphasis, "You applied as a beta." The room did something. Or, I did something. The air between us rearranged itself. "Yes," I said, "I'm not going to raise it with HR." I looked at Carrie steadily. "I appreciate that. I'm raising it with you instead." Carrie set down the pen. Why? There were several answers I had prepared for this possibility, because I had anticipated this possibility, because I prepare for things. They were all, in their own way, true. They were also all, in their own way, incomplete. Because I was worried it would affect my candidacy, I said, and I wanted the job based on what I could do. Carrie studied me for a moment. It would not have affected your candidacy. I didn't know that. No, Carrie said. You didn't. A pause. It doesn't affect anything here. I want to be clear about that. But if you're going to work closely with me, which you are, you should know that I'll notice, even with the suppressant, in quiet spaces. It's not something I can turn off. I understand. I did understand. Some things are chemistry, not choice. Good. Carrie picked up the pen again, which I read, correctly, as the signal that the conversation had reached its end. See you tomorrow. Quick pause here. If you want to watch our videos early with 0 ads or get access to exclusive videos, our Patreon has you covered, link in the description. Alright, back to where things get interesting. I left. I stood in the hallway for 3 full seconds before I remembered how to walk normally. The thing about working closely with someone is that closeness compounds. It starts small. A shared hallway at 8 in the morning when the office is still quiet and you have your coffee and they have theirs. And there's a brief exchange about whether the conference room is double booked. Then there's a project meeting where something goes unexpectedly sideways and you're the one who catches the error at 11:47 and you stay late to fix it, and Carrie stays too, not because the optics require it, but because, apparently, Carrie simply works that way, in all the way until the thing is done. Then there's a moment in the break room where someone left a birthday cake for a colleague in accounting, and you're both reaching for the same piece with the corner rose, and you both stop, and the small comedy of it makes you both almost laugh. Closeness compounds. I was 3 weeks in before I admitted to myself that I was in serious trouble, and even then I framed it as a professional complication rather than what it actually was. I told myself I was simply experiencing an intense admiration for a competent superior, the way you might admire a particularly elegant solution to a logistical problem. This is entirely reasonable. This happens all the time, except it doesn't usually involve noticing the way someone holds a pen, or the specific quality of the silence that settles in a room when they're deeply focused, or the fact that there is a particular expression, a slight tension at the corner of the mouth. The eyes going just a degree more still, that means they've found the exact issue in a document they've been reading. I noticed all of these things. I noticed them with the comprehensive, involuntary attention of someone who is, it turns out, not merely professionally admiring a superior. The suppressant did not help. This is something nobody talks about when they discuss Null Scent Pro or any of its competitors. The formula masks your scent to other people, but it does not mask other people's scent from you. It is a one-directional intervention. And Carrie, who presumably used no suppression formula and had no reason to, was, even filtered through the ambient noise of an office, present in a way that my nervous system had apparently decided to pay close and constant attention to. This is the physiological reality of being an omega near an alpha, and I am very irritated about it even now, in retrospect, knowing how things turned out. It feels undignified to be so comprehensively affected by someone who is simultaneously reviewing your project reports and CCing you on operational memos. I managed it. I managed it by being extremely good at my job, which is a thing I have always used as ballast when other things were pulling sideways. The projects were interesting and complex and demanding in ways that actually required the parts of my brain that were otherwise occupied with noticing Carrie. I threw myself in. I learned the team. I learned the systems. I stayed late, not because Carrie did, but because the work genuinely needed it, and because the work genuinely rewarded it, and because going home to my apartment and sitting with my thoughts in the quiet was, at that particular stage, not the thing I wanted most. Priya noticed. Priya noticing things is, I learned, a matter of certainty rather than possibility. She has the kind of perceptive intelligence that operates at a constant low hum in the background of whatever else she's doing, and it processes information about the people around her with startling accuracy. On a Thursday, 3 weeks and 2 days into my tenure, she put a coffee on my desk at 3 in the afternoon, which was not our usual coffee ritual, and sat in the edge of Callum's chair because Callum was in a meeting and said without preamble, "Are you doing okay?" "Fine," I said. "Uh-huh," Priya said, in the tone of someone who is allowing you to have the lie for exactly 1 more minute. "I'm settling in," I amended. "It's an adjustment." "The role, or Carrie?" I looked at her. She looked at me with the patience of someone who is not going to look away first. "Both," I said, eventually, which was the most honest answer I could produce without saying something I hadn't quite said to myself yet. Priya nodded, as though I'd given her a full and complete explanation. "Carrie," she said thoughtfully, "is easier than Carrie looks. Not easy, but easier. I don't find Carrie difficult." "No," she said. "You don't." And then she picked up her coffee and went back to her desk and left me with the specific sensation of having been gently and comprehensively read. The operational crisis when it came arrived on a Thursday evening, because crises have a preference for Thursdays, which is too late in the week to recover gracefully and too early to write off to the weekend, in the form of a vendor contract that had been sent to the wrong signatory, triggering a cascade of compliance flags that threatened the timeline of a project that 3 other timelines depended on. I found it at 6:45, when I was doing the end-of-day check that I do because I am, constitutionally, incapable of leaving loose ends unexamined. I looked at the contract. I looked at the flags. I looked at the timeline. Then I knocked on Carrie's door, which was still open, which meant Carrie was still here, which meant something about Carrie's own constitution with regard to loose ends. "Found something?" I said from the doorway. Carrie looked up from a laptop and read my expression with a speed that still, after 3 weeks, slightly unnerved me. "How bad?" "Manageable," I said, "if we start now." "Show me." We spread the documents across Carrie's desk and the adjacent table. The one that I'd begun to understand was the working table, as opposed to the desk, which was for the performance of having a desk. Carrie moved around the space with the focused economy of someone who is genuinely in motion rather than performing motion, and I matched it. Because when a problem is in front of me, I am also not good at performing anything. We worked for 2.5 hours. In that time, several things happened. The vendor contract issue was identified, isolated, and routed to the correct signatory with an explanatory note that Carrie wrote in 12 minutes, and that was, I thought privately, a masterclass in professional diplomacy under pressure. The compliance flags were addressed with documentation that I compiled and Carrie reviewed and signed off on. And the timeline was reconstructed to accommodate a 2-day buffer that I'm not sure either of us expected to find, but that we found because we were both in our different ways looking very hard. Also, somewhere around the 2-hour mark, Carrie ordered dinner. This was not something I'd been prepared for. Not the act itself. Ordering food during a working dinner is perfectly ordinary, but the way it was done, without asking my dietary preferences first, but then when placing the order, asking me directly with the particular attention of someone who was noting the answer for future reference. And the fact that when the food arrived, Carrie cleared a corner of the working table without ceremony, and we sat down and ate and talked about the project in a way that was different from conference room conversations. Because the room was smaller, and the hour was later, and we were the only people in the building. Different, not worse. Just different. "You caught this 3 hours earlier than anyone else would have," Carrie said, at some point during dinner. "I check everything before I leave." "I know. I've noticed." A pause. "It's a good habit." The previous coordinator had a different approach. Which approach? The everything will probably be fine approach. Efficient, I said, until it isn't. Carrie almost smiled. I was learning the gradient of that expression, the small variations between what most people might read as a neutral face and the subtler warmth that lived just underneath it. Exactly. We finished eating. The problem was solved. Carrie began tidying the table with the methodical efficiency of someone who hates leaving a workspace in disorder, and I helped. And there was a moment in which we both reached for the same stack of papers, and our hands were briefly proximate in a way that was entirely accidental and also, in the specific sensitivity of my nervous system at that hour of that evening, very loud. We both pulled back. We both said nothing about it. We continued tidying. I appreciate how you handled this, Carrie said, when the office was restored to its working order and we were both gathering our things to leave. It's the job. It's more than adequate performance of the job. It's a pause, and I got the sense that Carrie was choosing a word with some care. Investment. You're invested. I am, I said. This was true in more dimensions than the one we were discussing, and I suspected we both knew it. And I also suspected that neither of us was going to name those dimensions at 9:15 on a Thursday evening in a cleared-out office. "Good night, Nate," Carrie said. I had been called by my first name before. Of course I had, but there was something in the way Carrie said it in that particular moment in the quiet of the emptied office that lodged itself somewhere in my chest and did not move for a very long time afterward. "Good night," I said, and managed to exit the building without doing anything I would need to reckon with later. This was, looking back, a narrower margin than I made it sound. The following Monday, Priya was waiting at my desk with coffee and the expression of someone who had been patient for a specific and finite amount of time and had reached its limit. "You stayed late Thursday," she said. "Vendor contract issue." Just you and Carrie?" "It was my find, Carrie's sign-off authority." "How long were you here?" "About 2.5 hours. Priya picked up her coffee, set it down, picked it up again. "Nate," she said, in the tone of someone about to skip several conversational steps on purpose, "how long are you planning to pretend?" I looked at her. "Not about the designation thing," she clarified, with a wave that dismissed the topic I'd thought we might be approaching. "Callum figured that out in the first week, for the record. We don't care, it's none of our business, and frankly, the suppressant is impressive." She paused. "I meant the other thing." "The other thing. Right. I work for Carrie," I said. "Yes. It would be inappropriate." "That depends significantly on what it refers to." I stopped, started again. "The general situation." Priya looked at me with the infinite patience of someone who has watched this particular self-deception unfold from the beginning and has been waiting, with remarkable forbearance, for the person inside it to notice. "The general situation," she said, "in my observation, is mutual." My heart did the embarrassing thing again. "You don't know that," I said. "I've worked with Carrie for 4 years," she said. "I know when Carrie is interested in someone, and I know when Carrie is managing that interest with professionalism and considerable effort. These are two different things, and right now Carrie is doing both at the same time, which is impressive and also a little painful to watch from the outside." I sat with this for a moment. "It's still the situation," I said. "What situation?" "Boss, employee." I gestured vaguely. "Power dynamic. It's complicated. Everything worth anything is complicated." She stood, gathering her things to go back to her desk. "I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm telling you what I observe because you're my colleague and I like you, and I've watched you spend 3 weeks trying to compact yourself into a smaller shape so that you take up less of Carrie's notice, which is," she paused, searching, "both admirable and pointless, because you could be invisible and Carrie would still know exactly where you were in the room." She went back to her desk. Callum appeared from somewhere, handed me a USB drive with updated data visualizations, and said, cheerfully, "Good morning, you look like you've just been told something you already knew." "Is it that obvious?" I asked. "Only to people who know what to look for," he said, "which is both of us, and Carrie." He considered. "And probably Marcus at the front desk, but he's very professional about it." I pressed my face briefly into my hands, which is not a dignified response to revelations about one's emotional transparency, but felt warranted. 6 weeks into my employment, it rained. This is meteorologically unremarkable. It is relevant only because the rain started while I was still at the office. Again, working through a logistics issue that had a hard deadline and no interest in my transportation schedule. And by the time I emerged into the lobby at 8 in the evening, the street outside was an aggressive gray, and the rain was the kind that convinces you very quickly that an umbrella would be insufficient. I stood in the lobby looking at the weather and weighing my options. Inadequate umbrella taxi that might be 20 minutes away, the bus which was a 5-minute walk in the rain, or simply waiting. When Carrie came through the door behind me, clearly also just leaving, clearly having also made the calculation about the rain. We both looked at the street, we both looked at each other. There was a brief, shared appreciation of the absurdity of the situation. "Do you have a car?" Carrie asked. "No, was going to take the bus. I can drive you." A pause. "If you're nearby." I named the neighborhood. It was, as it happened, not far from Carrie's route home. A fact I somehow had not known, or had known and not let myself connect to anything. "Come on then," Carrie said, and we went to get the car. The drive was approximately 15 minutes in the rain, with the ambient soundtrack of windshield wipers and city noise, and the particular quiet of two people who have things to say but have been careful until now not to say them. Carrie drove the way Carrie did most things, with a focused competence that was unshowy and completely effective. The city outside the windows was blurred and orange and wet. I watched it and tried to be the kind of person who is simply grateful for a ride in bad weather and does not complicate things. "How are you finding it?" Carrie asked. 6 weeks in. "I like it," I said. "Actually like it, not performing liking it. I can tell the difference." "I know you can." A pause. "I find that disconcerting." "In a good way. Most people can't." "It's useful," Carrie said, "and occasionally inconvenient." "What's inconvenient about it?" A beat of silence that was different from the previous silences. "Knowing when something's being managed," Carrie said. "When someone's working to hold a careful line." The rain fell. The wipers moved. My heart was loud in my own chest. "Like me," I said, not a question. "Like both of us," Carrie said. This landed between us and stayed there, neither of us moving to pick it up or put it down. "We're both being careful," I said. "Yes." "Because it's complicated." "Yes." A pause. "Because I'm your supervisor, and that creates a real dynamic that I take seriously, and not because it's a convenient excuse, but because it actually matters." I appreciated this more than I knew how to say. "I know," I said. "I know you take it seriously." "But—" Carrie stopped. "But?" I asked, because I needed to know if there was a but and what shape it took. But being careful doesn't change what's there to be careful about. I turned to look at Carrie's profile in the dark and the rain light. And I thought about 6 weeks of watched expressions and shared problem solving and a birthday cake with a corner rose and a hand near a hand and a name said in a quiet office. And I thought about what it had cost me these 6 weeks to be careful and what it had apparently cost Carrie and whether careful was the only thing either of us were actually going to be. We arrived at my building. Carrie pulled over and the car idled and the rain came down and we both looked straight ahead for a moment. "I want to say something," I said. "You can," Carrie said. I didn't use the suppressant because I was ashamed of being an omega. I used it because I didn't want to walk into an interview where the first thing someone registered about me was a designation that some people still use to make assumptions. And the reason I wanted to be seen clearly before I was seen completely, I stopped, is the same reason I'm sitting here trying to be careful actually. Because what I feel is real, and I don't want it to be explained away as instinct or dynamic or chemistry." Carrie was quiet for a moment. "Then, what you feel." "What I feel," I confirmed. "And what do you feel?" I looked at the rain on the windshield. I looked at my hands in my lap. I looked at Carrie. "You," I said, "mostly you, in a way that has nothing to do with designation." Another silence. But this one was different again, not the silence of management or caution, but of something settling, something that had been held in a shape that didn't quite fit finally released into a shape that did. I want to be clear, Carrie said, that nothing should change at work until, if, both of us decide it can. Because I meant what I said about taking that seriously. I know. And this conversation doesn't need to be anything other than what it is. What is it? I asked. Carrie looked at me. The rain slid down the glass. Two people being honest with each other, Carrie said, for the first time without being careful about it. I felt something expand in my chest. That specific, terrifying sensation of something you've been holding, contracted finally being allowed its full size. I can work with that, I said. Good night, Nate. Good night, Carrie. I got out of the car, walked to my building in the rain because I'd forgotten, completely, about the umbrella question, stood in the lobby dripping on the tile and pressing my back against the wall and letting myself, privately, completely, and without apology, feel the full dimensions of what had just happened. Nothing changed at work. This is exactly what we had said, and exactly what we meant, and I want to be clear that it was not a disappointment. It was, actually, a relief. Because what we had was now a thing that existed in both our awareness, no longer a thing that only one of us was managing alone, and that changed the quality of the careful, even if it didn't change the careful itself. Priya noticed, of course. She didn't say anything. She simply started putting 2 coffees on her desk in the mornings, one for her and one for whenever she felt like handing me one, and occasionally she would look at me with an expression that said clearly, I know something happened, and I'm very pleased about it, and I'm not going to pry. See, Callum remained cheerfully oblivious, which was both a relief and oddly charming, because Callum's happiness existed somewhat independently of the interpersonal weather of the office. And there was something stabilizing about his consistent enthusiasm for data visualization in the middle of everything else. The work continued to be interesting. The projects were real and complex, and rewarding in the way that good work is rewarding, not just because it succeeds, but because the effort of doing it well is its own satisfaction. I found myself, increasingly, in a collaboration with Carrie that was fluid in the way that good collaborations get when the people in them understand each other's instincts. Not always agreeing. We disagreed fairly regularly, actually, about methodology and priority and the right way to handle specific interpersonal dynamics on the team, but disagreeing in the productive way, where the disagreement makes the outcome better rather than just harder. I discovered during this period that Carrie had a sense of humor that was very dry and almost entirely deployed in quiet moments when other people weren't paying attention, a remark made in an undertone during a long meeting, a particular expression when a piece of corporate communications used an especially egregious piece of jargon, the rare occasion when something genuinely funny happened in the office and Carrie's careful composure broke briefly into something warmer and less managed. I collected these moments. I kept them very securely in the part of my mind I had designated for things I was allowed to want. There was no further conversation like the one in the car. There did not need to be. What we'd said had been enough. A kind of foundation, not a structure, and we were both, apparently, the kind of people who need solid foundations before we build anything on them. Then, at 8 weeks, something shifted. The shift arrived in the form of a company event, an annual team dinner for the operations division that had been planned well before I joined, and that I therefore walked into as the newest person in the room, which is always an interesting position. These events reveal things about the social architecture of a team that ordinary working hours don't show. Who gravitates to whom? What the humor is like when professional filters are slightly lowered. Whether the team, collectively, actually likes each other, as opposed to simply functioning effectively together. This team, I was relieved to discover, actually liked each other. Carrie was present in a way that was subtly different from the office. Carrie, still contained, still attentive, but somehow the containment was slightly loosened, the way a person might allow themselves to be when they're not actively performing leadership. I watched, from a careful distance, as Carrie talked with people who were clearly genuinely liked and regarded them with a warmth that the office sometimes only suggested. Priya materialized at my shoulder with a glass of wine and the expression of someone who had been watching me watch Carrie. "Interesting, isn't it?" she murmured, seeing people in their natural habitat. "I wasn't staring," I said. "You were being very tasteful about it," she agreed. Across the room, Carrie said something to one of the team leads, a woman named Beatrice who handled client relations, and Beatrice laughed loudly enough that several other conversations paused, and Carrie's expression was the warm one. The actually warm one, and I had the specific sensation of watching someone be fully themselves for the first time, which is a particular and powerful thing to witness. Carrie looked up, found my gaze across the room, which was something I had not intended and which I did not manage to avoid in time. Something passed between us. Across the noise and the wine and the social distance of the event, something that was entirely too clear for a room full of colleagues. I looked away first, talked to the person next to me with perhaps excessive attention for the next 5 minutes. Later, near the end of the evening, Carrie was beside me in the comfortable way that proximity becomes when you've been careful about it for 8 weeks and the care is starting to cost more than it used to. "I think we should have dinner," Carrie said. "We're at dinner," I pointed out, "separately from this." A pause. The two of us, not a work dinner. "I absorbed this, the line you mentioned," I said. "About things not changing at work until I've given it significant thought." Carrie looked at me steadily. The team dynamics are solid enough that, managed carefully and transparently, a relationship between a supervisor and a direct report can exist without creating an unfair environment. I've consulted HR policy. I've consulted my own judgment. Both say it's navigable. You've consulted HR policy about this hypothetically. Not hypothetically, Carrie said, specifically. Danielle was very professional about it. I thought about Danielle, who had been present at my original interview and who had presumably, at some point in the past 2 weeks, had a very interesting conversation with Carrie. What did she say? That full disclosure, clear documentation, and commitment to maintaining professional fairness in performance evaluation were the necessary conditions, and that, in her view, people who approach it that way generally manage it without incident. "Very thorough," I said. "I'm a thorough person," Carrie said. "I know." I looked at my glass. "At the room, at Carrie." "Yes," I said. "Dinner." "Yes." The composure that Carrie maintained in virtually every professional situation did something then. A small, genuine, almost imperceptible softening. Not dramatic, just real. "Saturday," Carrie said. "Saturday," I agreed. I did not use the suppressant on Saturday. This was deliberate. It was also, I found when I was getting ready, slightly terrifying. Not because of what it meant biologically, but because of what it meant in terms of exposure. The suppressant had become, in a way, my professional armor, and it had extended into my sense of safety in spaces where Carrie was. Without it, I was simply myself, which is a state I am theoretically comfortable with and which felt, in this particular context, significant. Carrie picked the restaurant. It was good, unpretentious, warm, the kind of place where the menu is short because everything on it has been thought about. I arrived 3 minutes early, and Carrie arrived exactly on time, and we were shown to a corner table that was genuinely good for a first date, which Carrie had either requested or been given by fortune. The first 20 minutes were, I will be honest, slightly strange. Not uncomfortable, but strange in the specific way that a new register of an existing relationship always is. We had been colleagues who were careful with each other for 8 weeks. We were now in a restaurant that was not work. The familiar dynamics of our interaction were present and also slightly shifted. The way furniture looks different when the light comes from a different angle. Then Carrie said, "Tell me something about yourself that isn't on your employment file." And I laughed. A genuine, unmanaged laugh, because it was a good question and also a slightly absurd one, and Carrie smiled at the laugh, the full warm smile rather than the almost smile, and the strangeness dissolved. I told Carrie things. Ordinary things, but genuinely mine. that I became interested in operations management because I'd spent a summer helping my uncle reorganize a small business that was failing due to logistics problems, and the satisfaction of watching the systems click into place had stayed with me. That I taught myself to cook during a period in my mid-20s when I was living alone and too broke for regular restaurant meals and had discovered I was actually good at it. That I had a bad habit of reading the acknowledgments section of books before the actual book because I find the human texture of a finished work, who helped, who was thanked, who kept the writer fed, more moving than I can entirely explain. Carrie listened to all of this with complete, genuine attention. In return, I learned that Carrie had not originally intended to go into business, had started a degree in architecture, and still maintained a private and profound love of built spaces that occasionally expressed itself in strong opinions about which conference rooms in the office had the best spatial proportions. That Carrie was the oldest of 3 siblings and that the family was close in a matter-of-fact way that Carrie described with the ease of someone who had never needed to perform closeness because it simply existed. That Carrie had learned to make very good coffee because, as a principle, Carrie did not trust institutions to manage this correctly and had therefore taken it into personal jurisdiction. Is that also how you approach the operations division? I asked. Essentially, Carrie said, without irony, I don't trust systems that aren't working to fix themselves. You have to go in. And do you always? When I can. A pause. When it's worth it. The dinner was long, in the way that a dinner is long when time is doing something pleasurable. We ordered a dessert we didn't particularly need and split it without discussing whether to split it. The wine was good. The conversation moved between topics with the ease that I had always had with Carrie in working contexts, and that translated, gratifyingly, into this one. Toward the end, Carrie looked at me across the table and said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything," I said. "The suppressant. Do you plan to keep using it at the office?" I considered. "Do you want me to?" "That's not what I asked." "I know." I thought about it honestly. I think, for now, yes. Because I don't want the designation conversation to follow me through every introduction. It shouldn't, but it sometimes does, and I'd rather people know me first. I paused. But I don't feel like I need to hide it from you. Or from Priya and Callum, who apparently both figured it out anyway. Callum figured it out? Carrie looked genuinely surprised. He mentioned it once, very briefly, with no apparent judgment. Carrie filed this away with the expression of someone making a small recategorization of Callum's perceptiveness. "For what it's worth," Carrie said, "you never needed to hide it from me. I know that now." "You knew it the day I told you." "I knew it intellectually," I said. Knowing something intellectually and trusting it are different things. Carrie looked at me steadily. "Is there anything now that you're trusting intellectually but not yet fully?" I looked back. "A few things," I said honestly. "But they're getting smaller." We paid the bill and went out into the night, which was clear after the rain of recent weeks, and stood on the pavement in the ordinary way that people stand at the end of an evening that was good enough to be worth standing at the end of. Carrie reached over and took my hand. Not a gesture that announced itself, not a production, just a hand finding another hand, in the dark, with the particular confidence of someone who has decided and is acting on the decision. I held on. "Same time next week?" Carrie asked. "Yes," I said. "Absolutely yes." We were not, as it turned out, subtle enough to fool anyone at work. We had been careful. We had, as promised, disclosed to HR. A conversation with Danielle that was the most professionally surreal 20 minutes of my life, but that she handled with a composure that I deeply admired. We maintained, genuinely maintained, the professional register of our working relationship. Carrie assessed my performance with the same rigorous fairness that Carrie applied to everyone else. I knew this because Priya told me so, specifically and unsolicited, with the air of someone delivering reassurance they'd decided in advance was warranted. But people who work closely together know each other, and people who know each other notice change, and the change was, however managed, discernible. Callum noticed first, which surprised me until he told me, somewhat bashfully, that he'd actually noticed when I came in the Monday after our first Saturday dinner and seemed lighter. His word. It was accurate and slightly humbling. "I'm glad," he said. "For both of you. Carrie deserves someone who's actually paying attention, and you—" He paused. "You've seemed like someone trying very hard to be less than you are since you started. I don't know why, but it seemed like that." I thought about a small bottle of suppressant in my palm, a mirror in a bathroom, the calculation of what to show and what to hold back, and what it costs, over time, to sustain that. "I think I was," I said. "You should stop," he said, with the direct simplicity that was perhaps Callum's most distinctive quality. "You're very good at this. The less than thing doesn't help the work." "I'm working on it," I said. "Good." He went back to his data visualization. "Carrie looks at you," he added, without looking up, "the way the good ones look, just so you know." I did not know how to respond to this, so I said nothing, which Callum seemed to find perfectly acceptable. The thing that I hadn't anticipated. Because you can anticipate the shape of things without anticipating their texture, was how much easier everything became. Not easier in the sense of simpler, because nothing about our work was simple, and nothing about navigating a relationship with a supervisor could be simple. Not if you were doing it honestly. But easier in the sense of energy available. All the energy I had been spending, without fully accounting for it, on managing the distance between what I felt and what I was allowed to express, that energy came back. It went into the work, and it went into the things I'd been putting off outside work, and it went into the growing fact of Carrie, which was both simpler and larger than I'd expected. Carrie was, I want to be precise about this, not what I'd initially thought. I had thought, demanding, exacting, difficult to get close to, the kind of alpha who uses the designation the reviews had mentioned. And Carrie was those things, in some respects. The exacting was real. The demand for genuine effort and genuine thought was consistent and non-negotiable. But what I'd missed, from the outside, was the proportionality of it. Carrie was hard, because the work mattered, and because Carrie believed the people doing it were capable of meeting the standard. Not hard because difficulty was an assertion of power, not exacting because other people's inadequacy was satisfying. Hard because settling for less when better was available felt, to Carrie, genuinely, not performatively, like a kind of disrespect for the work and the people. I understood this in the same place I understand things about myself. What Carrie hadn't initially shown me, couldn't show me, in the asymmetry of early professional relationship, was the warmth underneath. And it was considerable warmth, offered carefully, as though it were something that had been measured and found real before being given. Carrie was not demonstrative in the performed sense, but Carrie was attentive in the way, that is, I've come to believe, the actual language of love, paying attention, remembering, adjusting, being present in whatever space you're in, as though that space matters and the people in it matter. Carrie remembered, without being reminded, that I take my coffee black and my deadlines seriously and my solitude as necessary restoration rather than introversion. Carrie noticed when I was tired before I said so, and responded not by making a production of the noticing, but by simply handing me something, a coffee, a cleared schedule. Once an absurdly good piece of chocolate that appeared on my desk with no note on a Thursday afternoon when I had been running on insufficient sleep for 4 days. I found the chocolate. I looked at Carrie's office. The door was open. Carrie was looking at a laptop and not, technically, looking at me at all. I ate the chocolate and felt something that was large and warm and had no adequate one-word name. 10 weeks into the job. 4 weeks since Saturday dinners became a standing arrangement. 3 weeks since Carrie first said, in the quiet of a Sunday morning in my apartment over coffee, made with the precise care that Carrie brought to all things, I want to be with you. Not in the indefinite sense. In the actual, specific sense of wanting to be in your life. I had put down my coffee cup. I had said, Carrie, just the name, because sometimes a name is enough. Yes? Carrie said. I used the suppressant because I was afraid of being seen as just the designation and not as me, I said. But I think I'd also, before this, spent a lot of time being afraid of being fully seen at all, by anyone. Carrie looked at me steadily. And now? And now, I said, you see me anyway, without the suppressant. With the suppressant, across a conference room, across a dinner table. You see me? And I stopped because the feeling was fuller than the sentence I'd started. It's not frightening anymore. It is a little frightening, Carrie said gently. It is, I admitted, but the other kind of frightening. The kind that means it's real. Carrie reached across the table and covered my hand with both of his, and the morning was quiet and ordinary and entirely, completely right. In the weeks that followed, I learned more gradients of Carrie. The way Carrie reads, completely fully, as though the book is the only thing in existence. Which is wonderful, except when you're trying to have a conversation and occasionally create situations in which you have to say someone's name 2 or 3 times with increasing volume before the reading. Trance breaks. The specific form of Carrie's stubbornness, which is not like most stubbornness, not self-righteous or entrenched or defensive, just very patient. Carrie will disagree with you, and will continue to disagree with you, and will do so without heat or aggression, just a steady, considered persistence that makes you realize, eventually, that you're gonna have to either produce a better argument or accept that Carrie might be right. The fact that Carrie is, quietly and without ceremony, very good at taking care of people. Not in an obvious way. In the way of noticing what's needed and providing it without drawing attention to the provision. The fact that Carrie cannot, for reasons that have never been fully explained to me and that I find completely endearing, parallel park without narrating the process aloud under breath. The fact that Carrie's hands, which in the office are always occupied, pen, keyboard, document, at rest, are expressive in a way that the rest of Carrie's composure isn't moving slightly when Carrie talks about something that matters, drawing shapes in the air at the edge of sentences. I fell in love with all of it. I fell in love, more precisely, with Carrie. Not with the idea of Carrie, or the professional Carrie, or the Carrie I'd constructed from 17 pages of search results and 3 forum reviews and a 48-hour deliberation that I'd told myself wasn't about Carrie. The actual Carrie who is complicated and thorough and precise and warm and occasionally infuriating and always worth it. 12 weeks into the job on a Friday evening when the office was emptying out for the weekend and Carrie was finishing the last review of a report that had been giving us both grief for 3 days. I knocked on the open door with 2 cups of coffee and the specific expression of someone who is interrupting on purpose and is not apologetic about it. Carrie looked up. It's Friday, I said. I'm aware. The report will be here Monday. The report needs to be submitted by 8 Monday morning. Which means you have. I did the arithmetic, approximately 60 hours minus sleep. I don't sleep much. I'm aware, I said. I also don't need 60 hours to help you finish this. Carrie looked at the report, looked at the coffee, looked at me. You were leaving, Carrie said. I was going to see if you were leaving. I set Carrie's coffee on the desk. Different thing. A pause. Then Carrie closed the laptop and picked up the coffee. Sit down then, Carrie said. We'll finish it tonight. I sat down. We worked for 2 hours and the report was good, genuinely good. The kind of thing that you read back at the end and feel a small satisfaction at that has nothing to do with ego and everything to do with the work having been worth doing. When we were done, Carrie sent the draft to Danielle for Monday morning and closed everything that needed closing and leaned back in the chair with the exhale of someone setting down something they'd been carrying. I was looking at Carrie across the desk in the evening light from the window. And I was thinking about a small bottle in a bathroom and a lie I'd told to get a job, and a boss who'd figured it out in under 10 seconds, and a drive in the rain, and a hand in the dark, and everything that had grown, quietly and thoroughly in the space between. What? Carrie asked. Because Carrie could always tell when there was a what. Nothing, I said. Something. I was thinking about the interview. The interview where you'd chemically obscured your designation? That interview, yes. Carrie regarded me with the gray-green expression that I had long since given up trying to categorize and had simply accepted as Carrie's and therefore good. And I was thinking about the 10 seconds, I said. Where you figured it out? What did you actually notice? Carrie considered, as though calculating whether this was a thing to be answered honestly. It was the kind of calculation Carrie made rarely and finished quickly. The way you held yourself, Carrie said. The particular quality of attention you were paying to everything in the room, which was characteristic of someone who has learned to compensate for an environmental disadvantage by knowing the environment better than it knows them. A pause. And the suppressant, yes, they work very well in rooms with more people. In a quiet room, there's a sort of absence, where there should be something. Where I should have been, I said. Where you were already, Carrie said. You were already entirely present. The formula just obscured the frequency. This was, for some reason, the thing that finally broke the last careful seal on something I had been holding for 12 weeks. I love you, I said. The words landed between us in the quiet office and were entirely, irreversibly true. Carrie's expression moved through several things quickly and settled into something I recognized now as the fullest warmth. The one held back for spaces where it was safe to be that large. I know, Carrie said. Is that all you've got? No. Carrie stood and came around the desk, and I stood too, and we were very close in the way that we had been carefully, deliberately, not quite close for 12 weeks. And it was strange that the careful distance had felt like so much effort when closing it was this easy. I've been in love with you, Carrie said. Since approximately the third morning you came in with annotations on a document that I'd sent you the evening before, and the annotations were correct, and I thought, there it is. There is the thing I've been looking for in a colleague for 8 years, and apparently also, inconveniently, in a person. That's a very Carrie way to fall in love, I said. I'm a very Carrie kind of person. A pause, so brief. I love you, Nate. There are moments in a person's life that you know while they're happening that you will carry them, not because they're dramatic. This one wasn't, not by any theatrical measure. An office, after hours, with the city darkening outside the window. Two people who had been careful and were now, for the first time, not being careful. Carrie kissed me. And it was exactly what it should have been, thorough and honest and warm, with the quality of something that had been thought about and was now being done without reservation. I kissed back with everything I had, which was considerable, because I am, apparently, the kind of person who feels things at a volume I've spent years learning to moderate, and I was done moderating. When we broke apart, the city outside was fully dark and the office was warm, and we were both, I think, slightly different than we'd been before. Not transformed in the dramatic sense. Just settled. The way things settle when they reach the shape they were always going to be. We should go home, Carrie said. We should, I agreed. A pause. Same home? Carrie asked. It was not, technically, the same home yet. We had not, technically, reached that particular arrangement. But it was a question asked by someone who was asking about the future, about the direction of a thing, about whether the shape we'd found was one we were going to keep and build. Working toward it, I said. Carrie's hand found mine. Good enough, Carrie said. I stopped using the suppressant, eventually, not all at once, not as a statement, but gradually, as the months settled and the team got to know me and the context in which people understood me grew fuller and more established, the formula became less necessary. People knew me. They knew my work and my habits and the way I annotated documents and the fact that I would in low-pressure moments drink an embarrassing amount of tea and have very strong opinions about the order of operations in a project plan. They knew me before they knew my designation, and when the designation became apparent, it did, over time, without announcement. It was simply one more piece of a person they'd already formed an opinion of. The opinion, I was pleased to find, was generally good. Carrie never treated me differently. I want to be clear about this. For the record, because it matters, the professional relationship was exactly what it would have been if I'd walked into that interview as myself, unsuppressed, and been hired on that basis. Carrie assessed my work rigorously and fairly, and with the particular quality of high expectation that I understood, by now, as a form of respect. Carrie was demanding in the way that means you believe someone is capable of the demand. I rose to meet it every time, not because of what was between us, but because of what the work actually required, and because I was genuinely good at it, and because the work genuinely mattered. The two things, work and love, existed in the same space without contaminating each other. This is harder than it sounds and easier than I feared. And I think the key is that both Carrie and I were committed, from the beginning, to taking both seriously, not performing seriousness, actually bringing the care. We moved in together at month 8, not dramatically, not in the way that things happen in the stories where people fall in love and the world reorganizes around them. We moved in together because Carrie pointed out matter-of-factly that we were splitting our time between 2 apartments at approximately 50% each, and this was logistically inefficient, and also, Carrie said, with the slight vulnerability that Carrie deployed rarely and precisely, I want to wake up in the same place as you and not have to calculate whose turn it is. I said yes. Obviously, I said yes. The first morning in our shared space, Carrie's apartment, which was larger and also had the best coffee setup I had ever encountered. Evidence of the coffee trust issues story. I woke up to the smell of very good coffee and Carrie in the kitchen making it, and I lay in the light for a moment before I got up. And I thought about a small clinical bottle and a mirror and a person trying to make themselves the right shape to fit through a door. I didn't need to do that anymore. The door was open. The room was mine. I got up. Carrie handed me a cup without looking up from whatever had already captured the morning's first focus. A tablet, a document, something already in progress, and I drank it standing in the kitchen of our apartment in the morning, and I was exactly as I was entirely present, no frequency obscured. It was the most ordinary thing. It was everything. Tea. This is how I got the job, and how I got the boss, and how I got, along the way, the life. Not in spite of being who I am, but because, once I stopped managing the distance between that and what I showed the world, there was simply more of me available. For the work, for the team, for Carrie. Sore for myself. Sore for sit, is in the medicine cabinet still. Old habits. But the cap hasn't been opened in 6 months, and I think one of these days I'll just put it in the trash. Because some things you don't need to carry anymore once you've learned you're worth knowing as you actually are. XTA. The job, it turns out, was always going to be mine. XTA Carrie figured that out in under 10 seconds. Top. It just took me a little longer to believe it. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.